In 1853, a man set down his axe in the Vermont woods and vanished forever. His hat remained. His tools remained. He did not. The town of Glastonbury was young then, barely more than a logging camp clinging to the side of the Green Mountains. Men lived hard lives, carving out a future with saws and sweat. But on that day, the future carved them back. Silas, a logger whose name is barely remembered now, walked into the woods with his fellow workers. He stopped to rest, laid his axe aside, set his hat down on a branch, and was gone. No shout, no struggle, no blood on the leaves. The others looked up from their work and realized Silas was simply not there anymore. And here's the part that freezes your blood. They searched, not just for a day, for weeks. They scoured every gully, every stream, every trail. His hat was still where he'd placed it. His tools were still on the ground. But Silas had evaporated, as if the mountain had taken him for itself. That's how the story begins, or at least, that's how we choose to begin it. But the truth is, the Bennington Triangle doesn't follow the order of time. Its mysteries bleed through the decades like water soaking through paper. One moment, it's 1853, and the logger is gone. The next, it's 1946, and a college girl steps onto the long trail, never to return. These stories do not line up neatly. They overlap, echoing one another across the years. And maybe that's the most terrifying part. Because if time itself bends in the Bennington Triangle, then maybe all those who vanished aren't gone at all. Maybe they're still there, caught between then and now. Think about that as you keep watching. Because by the time we reach the end of this story, you'll see how impossible it is to walk away from this mystery unchanged. Let's jump for a moment. Not to Paula Jean Weldon in 1946, not yet, but to 1949, to a man named James Tedford. He was a veteran, old, weary, trying to make his way back home to Bennington on a bus. The passengers saw him sitting there, looking out the window. The driver swore he was in his seat, but when the bus pulled into town, James was gone. His luggage was still neatly tucked away. His timetable was in his pocket. His seat was empty. Do you see it? The echo of Silas's hat on the branch, his tools by the stump. The belongings are always left behind. The people are not. Now go back again. 1853. The searchers call Silas's name into the woods until their voices are hoarse. Some say they heard something calling back. Not Silas, something else. A low hum in the trees, as if the forest itself was answering. Men swore they'd seen strange lights, floating globes between the trunks. Others talked of enormous shadows moving where no man could walk. You can dismiss these as stories told by tired, frightened men, but remember this. Nearly 100 years later, people reported the same lights, the same shapes, in the very same forest. Coincidence? Or does the mountain repeat itself, over and over, until we finally pay attention? Pause here. Imagine you were one of those men. Imagine finding your friend's tools, but not your friend. Imagine your dog barking at the tree-line, hair bristling, teeth bared at something you can't see. How long would you stay in those woods before you ran back down the mountain and never returned? And here's where I need you to lean closer, because this story doesn't belong to 1853. It doesn't belong to 1946 or 1949 or 1950. It belongs to anyone who has ever walked into the Bennington Triangle and felt the air shift around them. It belongs to us now, sitting in the dark, trying to make sense of a mystery that doesn't want to be solved. Stay with me. Don't click away, because this isn't just a history lesson, it's a warning. You see, the Native Americans avoided this mountain long before the loggers came. They said it was cursed, a place where the four winds met in battle, creating confusion, storms, madness. They told of an enchanted stone, a rock that swallowed anyone who stepped on it. Imagine hiking, your boot landing on moss, and suddenly the ground opening beneath you. Not into a hole, not into water, but into nothing, pure emptiness. That's how they explained vanishings like Silas's. And when you hear that legend, doesn't it sound less like superstition and more like a memory? But we can't stay in 1853 forever. Let's leap forward. A winter evening in 1946. Paula Jean Weldon, 18 years old, a student at Bennington College, decides to hike the long trail. She wears a bright red coat, so vivid it should have been visible for miles. She tells her roommate she's going for a walk. A couple sees her near the trailhead, and then, like Silas, she's gone. Search parties comb the woods. Hundreds of people, even the FBI, even planes overhead. Not a shred of red is ever found. Do you feel it? The repetition, the taunt? A hat left behind. A timetable still in its pocket. A red coat missing from the world. It's almost as if the mountain is laughing at us. And what makes Paula's story so haunting isn't just that she vanished. It's what her disappearance left behind. The state of Vermont realized they had no coordinated police force to handle such a search. Her vanishing led directly to the creation of the Vermont State Police. Think about that. One girl's absence reshaped an entire state. Even in her disappearance, the mountain reached out into the world of the living. But what about the ones who did come back? Or rather the one, Frida Langer. In 1950, she slipped into a stream while hiking with a cousin. She turned back to camp to change her clothes. She never arrived. Search teams dragged the woods for weeks. They found nothing. Months later, when the snow melted, her body appeared, right in the middle of an area that had been searched dozens of times before. How do you explain that? A body appearing where there was none? Unless, of course, something put her back. And I want you to hold on to that thought, because if the mountain can take, and if the mountain can return, then the question becomes, who decides? Who or what chooses which bodies to keep, and which to give back? Let me ask you this. What's worse, to vanish without a trace, leaving only your belongings behind, or to come back months later, broken, in a place where everyone already looked? Tell me in the comments. I want to know your thoughts. And please, stay until the end, because the story isn't finished. We've talked about vanishings. We've talked about echoes across time. But we haven't talked about the sound the forest makes when it goes silent. Hikers say the woods of the Bennington Triangle sometimes fall into a hush, so complete it feels unnatural. Birds stop singing. Branches stop creaking. Even the wind seems to hold its breath. And in that silence, people feel watched. They feel followed. They feel like if they take one more step, they'll never take another. That silence is what swallowed Silas. That silence is what followed Paula. That silence still waits, even now. And maybe you're wondering, why does this matter? Why tell this story? Because the Bennington Triangle isn't just a mystery locked in the past. It's a reminder that there are still places in this world we don't understand, still places that resist explanation. And the next person who disappears might not be a logger from 1853 or a student from 1946. It could be someone today, tomorrow, maybe someone like you. So don't turn away. Watch this until the very end, because the forest is waiting. And the deeper we go into this story, the closer we come to understanding what it wants. The forest has a way of playing tricks on you. Ask anyone who has walked the trails of Glastonbury Mountain, and they'll tell you, time bends differently there. Minutes stretch into hours, hours collapse into moments, and before you realize it, you don't know how long you've been walking. Or worse, you don't know where you've been walking. But what if it's not a trick? What if it's a design? In the Bennington Triangle, people talk about lost time. Entire blocks of memory gone. Hikers who set out at noon and suddenly find the sun setting even though they've only taken a few steps. Imagine that. Imagine losing not just your path, but the very hours of your life. Isn't that another form of disappearance? And the strange thing is, those who do come back from it often describe the same thing. Silence. A silence so deep, it presses against your chest like weight. It's as if the woods aren't just empty of sound. They're full of something else. Something listening. Something waiting. If you think that's just paranoia, then let me take you back. Not to Silas in 1853, not to Paula in 1946, but to a hunter named Midday Rivers in 1945. Midday knew the woods. He had guided countless hunting parties, and he was no stranger to the mountain's trails. But during one of those trips, he walked a short distance ahead of his group, and that was the last anyone saw of him. The hunters searched, the townsfolk searched, the authorities searched. Mideye was an old man, yes, but he wasn't careless. He didn't just wander off. His gun never turned up. His body never turned up. It was as if the mountain opened its jaws and swallowed him whole. And when I tell you this, do you feel the chill? Because this was just 1 year before Paula Jean Weldon's disappearance. 2 vanishings in 2 years, and they weren't the last. The pattern was forming, and people started whispering what they had always feared. The mountain takes who it wants. Here's something strange. When Paula vanished, a waitress swore she saw her in Massachusetts days later. Other witnesses claimed she had run away or been kidnapped. But why do these explanations always appear after the fact? Are they desperate inventions? Ways to deny the darker possibility that Paula never left those woods at all? It's easy to dismiss the tales of hunters, students, or loggers. But what about a child? In 1949, a boy named Paul Jepson climbed into his mother's truck while she tended to pigs on a farm near the edge of the mountain. When she returned, Paul was gone. Just like that. His tiny footprints led to the woods, then vanished. Search dogs followed his scent, but the trail stopped cold, as if he had been lifted into the air. Think about that. A little boy, full of life, laughter, and mischief erased. And here's where it turns cruel. Paul was wearing a bright red jacket, just like Paula's red coat. Both should have been visible for miles. Neither ever was. Do you feel the threads connecting now? The logger's tools, the soldier's timetable, the red coats, the boy's footprints cut short. The pattern is too sharp to ignore. And every time, the belongings remain. The people do not. Now let me rehook you. What if it isn't a mountain at all? What if it's something else entirely? There are whispers of portals in Glastonbury, places where the air feels wrong, heavy, almost charged. Step through, and you're not just in the forest anymore. You're somewhere else. The Abenaki people, who avoided the mountain long before colonists arrived, spoke of the place where man should not go. They believed in a cursed stone that devoured those who touched it. Sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? A stone that swallows men. But how ridiculous is it compared to a bus passenger vanishing from his seat without a trace? Let's pause. Picture this. You're hiking with friends. The trail is narrow, the trees dense. You're laughing, maybe telling a story. You look up, and they're gone. You spin, call their names. Nothing. Their backpack is leaning against a tree. Their water bottle is still half full. But they're gone. Would you keep walking? Or would you turn back, heart pounding, wondering if the ground beneath you is safe to step on? Tell me in the comments, what would you do? Would you dare keep going? Because here's what terrifies me. Every story feels less like a random tragedy and more like a warning. Jump again. 1950, Frida Langer. Remember her? The only one whose body was found. Months after her disappearance, her remains appeared in a spot that had been searched extensively before. This is important. It means either the searchers missed her, which seems impossible, or her body wasn't there the first time. Someone or something placed her back. And that's where the theories get dark. Some say there's a serial killer buried in the annals of Bennington's history. Someone who stalked the woods for decades, taking victims and hiding them so well they were never found. But if that were true, how could he operate from 1853 to 1950? How could his reach extend across nearly a century? Unless, of course, it wasn't a man at all. Others believe in the paranormal. UFO enthusiasts point to strange lights in the skies over Vermont. Lights that date back not just decades, but centuries. Some vanishings could be abductions, not by people, but by something else. After all, how else do you explain a boy's scent trail ending in the middle of the woods with no further footprints? And then there are the skeptics who say it's all coincidence. That Silas wandered off and fell. That Mideye Rivers got lost. That Paula ran away. That Paul was kidnapped. That Frida drowned and her body surfaced later. But you and I both know the simplest explanations often fail when the pattern is too strong. If it was only one disappearance, maybe. 2 perhaps. But 5, 10, stretching from 1853 into the modern day. That's not accident. That's design. And maybe the design is older than we can understand. Because Glastonbury Mountain isn't just another peak, it's a place of layers. A site of native warnings, of colonial greed, of industrial exploitation. Loggers stripped the land, left it scarred, then abandoned it when it could give no more. And some believe the mountain remembers, that it punishes, that the vanishings are retribution for taking what should never have been touched. Stay with me, don't look away. Because the most chilling part is this. The disappearances stopped after Frida. At least, the famous ones. But does that mean the mountain has gone silent? Or has it simply grown more selective, more careful? What if the vanishings never stopped at all? What if we just don't hear about them anymore? Think of it. How many hikers never return and are written off as accidents? How many lost travelers are buried in statistics, their names forgotten? The mountain doesn't need to take dozens at once. It just needs to keep feeding, slowly, quietly. And who would know? And here's my question for you. What if you stepped onto that trail tomorrow? Would you be the next story? Would you be the next name whispered into the silence? I want you to sit with that unease. Because that's the power of the Bennington Triangle. It doesn't just swallow people. It swallows certainty. It forces us to question what's possible. Somewhere, Silas's hat is still resting on a branch. Somewhere, Paula's red coat might still hang between two trees. Somewhere, Paul's tiny footprints lead into nothing. And maybe, just maybe, they're all still there. Not gone, but waiting, in some fold of time we cannot see. So watch until the end, because the story isn't finished. Not for me, not for you, not for anyone who dares to enter those woods. And when this video ends, I want you to tell me, do you believe the mountain takes who it wants? Or do you think there's another explanation hiding in the shadows? Your voice matters. Your opinion matters. Share it below. Because the Bennington Triangle isn't just a mystery, it's a mirror. And when you stare into it, it stares back. They say the forest remembers. Not in words, not in stories, but in silence. A silence that lingers long after footsteps fade. If the Bennington Triangle remembers, then it carries something darker than any living witness could bear. In 1853, Silas the logger left behind his tools. In 1946, Paula Jean Weldon left behind her red coat in memory only, never found again. In 1949, a little boy's footprints ended abruptly in the dirt. None of these stories are separate. They fold into each other like overlapping shadows. The mountain does not tell time the way we do. Its stories circle, repeat, and bleed into one another until you can't tell where one disappearance ends and the next begins. Now shift with me. Not 1853, not 1946 to 1892. It isn't a disappearance this time, but blood, a murder. Henry McDowell, a worker in nearby Fayetteville, beat his co-worker to death with a rock. When questioned, he claimed voices from the mountain commanded him to do it. He was judged insane, locked away in an asylum. But here's the part that chills. He vanished from the asylum, escaped without a trace. Some say he disappeared in the night. Others whisper the mountain called him home. Either way, he was gone, added to the list of those the Bennington Triangle keeps for itself. And isn't that telling? Not only the innocent vanish here, the guilty too. The mountain makes no distinctions. Nearly 60 years later, the pattern grew sharper. The locals knew it. They stopped speaking of Glastonbury as just another mountain. They called it cursed ground. Even hunters began refusing to enter its deepest trails. And when they did, they carried charms, whispered prayers, and never went alone. Still, men like Mid-Eye Rivers walked into those woods and never returned. Then came Paula. Then came Paul. Then came James Tedford on the bus, sitting in his seat until the bus stopped. His body gone, but his luggage still there. Always the same pattern. Possessions remain, people vanish. But think of this. Paul's mother once said her son had an unusual attraction to the mountain. He would talk about it, gaze toward it, as if something was calling him. That detail should make your skin crawl. Did the disappearances happen by force, or did some victims go willingly? Pulled by an invisible invitation? If that sounds like superstition, look closer at the threads tying these vanishings together. Paula and Paul both wore red, the brightest color to spot in a forest, yet neither was ever seen again. Midday, an experienced guide, disappeared while only a short distance ahead of his group. James sat in plain view of passengers on a bus before simply no longer existing when it stopped. In each case, witnesses were nearby. In each case, something unseen was stronger. Some people say the mountain is not just land, but a living thing, that it hungers, that it feeds slowly, deliberately, choosing victims the way a spider chooses which insect to drain next. Picture yourself walking alone through those woods. The sky is heavy with gray. Your boots crunch over leaves. Then you notice something. Your own heartbeat feels louder than it should, thudding in your ears. The forest has gone completely silent. Even the wind has stopped moving the branches. You're standing in a world where the rules of sound and time no longer apply. You take a step off the trail, though you don't know why. And maybe that's it. Maybe that's the last step you'll ever take in the world we know. Do you believe that can happen? Or do you tell yourself there's always a rational explanation? Rational explanations exist, of course. Skeptics claim Midday fell into a stream and drowned. That Paula ran away to start a new life. That Paul was kidnapped. That James slipped from the bus at a stop no one noticed. That Frida Langer drowned and surfaced months later, where people somehow overlooked her body. But are we supposed to believe all those explanations line up, decade after decade, with the same chilling patterns? Coincidence breaks down when the story repeats too many times. And what about the legends older than any colonial record? The Abenaki avoided this land. They spoke of cursed stones that could swallow a man whole. They said 4 winds clashed at the mountaintop, leaving confusion, storms, and madness. These aren't fairy tales. They were warnings, passed down by people who lived with the land far longer than settlers did. Maybe we should have listened, because maybe this isn't random. Maybe Glastonbury takes, because something was taken from it first. When the loggers came, they stripped the mountain bare. Trees fell, rivers choked with silt, animals disappeared. The mountain was left wounded and abandoned, its industry gone when there was nothing left to cut. Is it really so impossible to think it might take payment in return? Imagine if every tree stump left behind became a marker. Imagine if every scar in the soil became a mouth, a place where something waits, patient and watchful. And sometimes, that something returns what it has taken, like Frida Langer. Her body placed back in plain view months after her disappearance. Searchers had combed that ground again and again. She was not there before. Yet there she was, returned to the earth, but not to life. If the mountain gives back what it takes, it does so on its own terms, at its own time. That raises the most terrifying question of all. Who decides? Who chooses who is taken, who is returned, and who is never seen again? Some call it fate. Others call it punishment. A few whisper that the missing are not dead at all, but trapped in another layer of time, still walking those woods, screaming our names while we pass by unaware. Think of Paula, 18 years old, forever wandering a trail she can't escape. Think of Paul, just a boy, calling for his mother in a forest that no longer echoes back. Think of James Tedford, staring out a bus window at the night, one blink away from vanishing into silence. What's more frightening than death? It's being alive, unseen, unreachable, in a place where no one can ever find you. And now think of this. The famous disappearances stopped after Frida in 1950. At least officially. Does that mean the mountain went silent? Or does it mean it simply grew smarter, choosing people who would not be missed by history books, whose names would fade unnoticed? How many hikers vanish each year, their stories filed away as accidents, their families left without answers? The mountain no longer needs to shock us. It only needs to feed quietly. The truth is, Glastonbury Mountain doesn't care if we believe. It doesn't need us to solve its mystery. It waits, patient, beyond the limits of our understanding. But I want you to consider something before this part of the story ends. Somewhere, Silas's tools are still rusting in the soil. Somewhere, Paula's red coat may still be draped on a branch no one has found. Somewhere, Paul's footprints are still pressed into earth before they vanish into nothing. If you step into those woods, do you step over the same ground where they disappeared? And if you do, how do you know the forest won't choose you next? So I ask you, would you dare go there? Would you walk the long trail? Would you climb Glastonbury knowing what it has taken? Or would you turn back before the silence finds you too? Tell me what you think. I want to hear your opinion. Do you believe this mountain takes who it wants? Or do you believe it's all coincidence? All human error and tragic accident? Whatever you decide, remember this. The story isn't finished. Not for me. Not for you. Not for anyone who sets foot in the Bennington Triangle. Watch until the end, because the forest is not done with us yet. They said the snow muffled the search party's footsteps, but the silence underneath it all was far heavier. Dogs refused to go further into certain pockets of the mountain, whining, trembling, digging their paws into the frozen ground, as if some primal instinct warned them not to cross an invisible line. Men carried lanterns, their breaths rising in clouds, but the light seemed weaker in those woods, swallowed whole by the trees. That winter, in 1946, Paula Jean Weldon's name was whispered again and again, echoing against trunks that gave nothing back. But the mountain had always been like that. It takes, and it does not return. The story of Glastonbury is not only one of vanishings, it is one of erasure. Entire settlements were erased. Fayetteville, once alive with loggers and families, stands no more. The railroad that carried timber down the slopes was abandoned, the tracks left to rust and rot in the wilderness. Even the town itself dissolved, unincorporated, as if the mountain simply swallowed its history along with its people. Isn't that chilling? That the land itself could force humanity to retreat? Long before Silas left his axe in the woods, before Henry McDowell heard murderous voices, before Paula's red coat became legend, the Abenaki told stories about this mountain. They said the stone was cursed, that the winds carried voices that lured hunters away, that certain corners of the land were never meant for human feet. Their elders warned that there was something hungry here, and they called it a place of darkness. But who listens to warnings when profit glimmers? Loggers carve into the woods, chasing timber. Railmen pushed steel into its bones. Hikers later marched into its silence, drawn by maps and curiosity. And one by one, people were claimed. James Tedford's story remains one of the cruelest. A war veteran, older, quiet. He boarded a bus in 1949, sitting among passengers who remembered seeing him as the vehicle passed through the valleys. By the time it reached Bennington, he was gone. His belongings remained on the seat, his ticket stubs still there. But Tedford himself had vanished somewhere between stops, as if the road had split open and swallowed him whole. Now think about that. We speak of the forest as the predator, but here was a man taken not from the woods, but from the thin line of a moving bus. That stretches the mystery further than we'd like. It suggests the triangle is not confined to trails, not limited to trees. Perhaps the reach is wider. Perhaps the rules we think exist don't. And if that's true, then where do you ever stand safe? Some say the disappearances align with ley lines, invisible veins of energy running through the earth. Others suggest magnetic anomalies disorient compasses, swallowing direction until the lost wander in circles. But explanations like these feel too clean, too neat. They can't explain why belongings are left behind as if staged. They can't explain why dogs balk. They can't explain the voices, the dread, the whispers of being followed. Imagine being alone, knowing that dozens before you had vanished in the very same silence pressing around you. Imagine realizing the stories weren't just old tales, but warnings written in other people's fates. When searchers scoured the woods for Paula, they were desperate, yet not everyone went far. Some feared that looking too deep meant risking never coming back. In one chilling moment, a volunteer swore he saw flashes of red among the trees, like fabric flickering. He followed, called out, but when he drew near, it was gone. Nothing. Only branches moving without wind. Was it her coat? Or something the forest wore to mock them? And then there was Frida Langer, the woman who disappeared in 1950, only to be found months later. Unlike the others, she was returned, but the body was so decayed, so ravaged, that no cause of death could be determined. Her family received no answers. Instead of closure, they were given only more questions. Why her? Why was she the one returned when the others were not? Was it mercy? Or was it cruelty? Reminding the living that the mountain controls what they see and what they never will. The weight of these stories is not just historical. People who hike the trails today speak of unease. They take photos that reveal strange orbs. They feel watched. Some refuse to go back, even after nothing outwardly happens. The place plants itself in the mind like a seed, sprouting shadows long after the boots are off and the campfire is cold. The Bennington Triangle is not just a setting. It feels like a presence, something breathing, something that doesn't just exist in the trees, but in the silence after you leave. So why do we keep telling these stories? Because they force us to confront the one fear none of us can escape, the unknown. Not death, not violence, not even ghosts, but the possibility of being erased, of walking out the door, into the woods, into the night, and never stepping back into the world we know. And that's what happened to Silas in 1853. That's what happened to Paula in 1946. That's what happened to Tedford, to Paul Jepson, to Mideye Rivers. And that is what could happen to anyone who strays too far into that place the Abenaki warned us about. Maybe the question isn't why they vanished. Maybe the question is why we keep following them. Because every time we return to the Bennington Triangle, we are stepping closer to the line, listening harder to the silence, hoping to hear an answer, fearing we might. And maybe one day, someone watching this right now will feel the pull. They'll pack their bag. They'll lace their boots. They'll say, "It's just a story." And then the mountain will write their name into its silence, just as it always has. The woods at night are not black. They are a colorless void, a place where shapes lose meaning and every sound is sharpened against silence. Somewhere in that void, in 1853, an axe rested against a stump. A hat waited in the dirt. A man named Silas never came back. And since then, generation after generation, others have followed him into that same quiet abyss. But what if the abyss is not emptiness at all? What if it's crowded? When you walk into Glastonbury, you are not walking alone. You walk among hundreds of years of footsteps, pressed into the earth by those who never walked out again. Their breath lingers on the moss. Their voices sink into the granite. Their eyes, if they still have them, may be watching from the tree-line. That is the terror of this place. Not the idea of ghosts, not even the idea of monsters, but the suggestion that the missing are not gone. They are simply waiting in a place the living cannot enter. Think about James Tedford again, a man vanishing from a bus seat, his folded timetable left behind like a tombstone. Could he be sitting still, frozen in some in-between? Could he be staring out at us from a world layered just a hair's breadth away? Or little Paul Jepson, only 8 years old. His mother said he couldn't stop talking about the mountain. She tried to steer him away. But one day he slipped out of sight, drawn toward the very ridge that had swallowed others. Did the mountain hear him? Did it answer? And Paula, the girl in the red coat. Hikers to this day claim to see flashes of crimson when the fog rolls down. Searchers said the same in 1946. Was she taken? Or is she still there, trapped in an endless loop, always just out of reach, always flickering like a signal that no one can decode? These are not isolated tragedies. They feel like parts of a pattern, as though the mountain is an author, writing the same story over and over with new names, new faces, new belongings left behind like punctuation. What is it about this land? Some say it's the earth itself, that magnetic fields twist and warp compasses, bending direction. Others whisper of portals, thin places where one step carries you somewhere else entirely. Some even believe there is something alive in the ground itself, something that feeds. And yet, all of those theories fail to answer the most unsettling detail, the silence. Not natural quiet, but an oppressive hush, the kind that sits heavy on the chest, the kind that makes even animals resist entering. Hunters have spoken of being stalked, not by a creature they could see, but by a dread that moved behind them like a shadow. One man described walking in circles, his compass spinning, until he stumbled across his own footprints leading back the way he thought he had never gone. He left the woods shaken, saying, "The mountain does not want you to leave." Maybe that's the truth. It isn't that people lose their way. It's that the place refuses to give them back. And that's the thread binding all of these vanishings, the feeling of being claimed. Tools left behind, belongings untouched, lives erased. You can almost imagine the moment it happens. A logger wiping sweat from his brow, a student brushing snow from her coat, a child chasing a sound, a man staring from a bus window. Then nothing, an unseen hand plucking them from the world, as effortlessly as a flame snuffed out. Why do we keep circling these stories? Because they force us to ask what we fear most. What happens when someone is simply gone? Not buried, not mourned, not explained, just erased. And yet, for every person who vanishes, there are 100 who return from the mountain with only unease. They speak of dreams afterward, dreams of walking paths they never remember taking, dreams of hearing voices calling their names in tones that sound almost familiar. Some describe waking with mud on their shoes. They swear wasn't there the night before. If the mountain is alive, then perhaps it toys with us. Perhaps not everyone is chosen. Perhaps it waits, deciding who belongs to its silence and who gets sent back. That is what chills me most. The randomness, the indifference. Because when you look at Silas's axe, Paula's coat, Paul's half-eaten lunch, Tedford's empty seat, you realize the mountain does not discriminate. Young, old, guilty, innocent, it does not matter. The land takes who it will. And so the question becomes, why are you listening to this right now? Is it curiosity? Is it disbelief? Is it the thrill of fear from a safe distance? Or is it the same pull that lured them? Maybe you think you'd never fall for it. You'd stay on the trail. You'd carry the right gear. You'd never wander alone. But ask yourself this. What if the mountain isn't interested in your choices? What if, when it wants you, no map, no compass, no preparation can keep you tethered to this world? Close your eyes for a moment and picture it. The lantern light, the crunch of snow, the flicker of red vanishing deeper into the trees. Would you follow? Would you risk never walking back out? That's the legacy of the Bennington Triangle. It isn't just history. It's a question posed to everyone who hears its stories. And now I'll pose it to you. Do you believe these people simply got lost, their bones hidden by moss and roots? Or do you believe something older, darker, and hungrier lives in those woods? Something that still waits, watching, patient as stone? Tell me what you think. Because stories like this aren't meant to be told once and forgotten. They live on through us, through your thoughts, your voices, your fears. So leave your answer. Was it the earth itself? Was it human hands? Was it something we don't yet have words for? And most of all, would you walk into those woods? Because remember, they never came back. And that brings us to the end of the story. Or maybe it isn't an ending at all. Because the Bennington Triangle doesn't tie itself in a bow. It leaves us with silence, with shadows, with the ache of not knowing. These disappearances don't resolve. They linger like voices on the wind, daring us to imagine what really happened in those woods. But now the question turns to you. What do you think? Were these people lost to the wilderness, claimed by the cold and the earth, their bones hidden too well for us to ever find? Or do you believe something older, stranger, and far hungrier lives in those forests, choosing its victims and keeping them forever? I want to know your thoughts. Share them in the comments, because mysteries like this don't just survive in old newspapers or dusty archives. They survive because we keep asking, because we keep telling the stories, because we refuse to let the silence win. And while you're here, what story should I try next? Another disappearance? A haunted town? A case of true crime, so tangled it almost feels like folklore? You decide where we go from here. Your suggestion might become the next journey into the unknown on this channel. If you've stayed until the very end, thank you. That tells me you felt something while walking through this story with me. And if you want to keep exploring mysteries, legends, and truths darker than fiction, make sure to subscribe and join me again. Because the further we go, the stranger it all becomes. Until then, stay curious, stay careful, and remember, some places don't let go.